All right, this is part 2 of our 2-part episode on faith. If you haven't yet seen part 1, you can stop here and go check that out. But this is the continuation and final part of our initial conversation on faith through tragedy. This conversation went longer than I had expected, so I decided to split it into 2 parts. This episode will pick up where we left off, where we were discussing the symbiotic relationship that we can have with God through faith. So let's dive in.
But God already knows everything.
Yeah.
And so the best thing he can do is just say, God, I give up.
Yeah. I'll go back to that, to convulsing and trembling. Could he have just stopped me? Sure. Of course he could have. But I'm thankful that he waited on me to ask him.
Yeah.
Because that gives me strength and faith in his control. And I think that's what an amazing symbiotic relationship that God has enabled us to have. And I think so many of us want God to be an authoritarian, because I think that's how we were taught he is. And we perceive the Bible in that way. But our true God does not treat us authoritarian like.
Right.
He actually wants to be in symbiosis with us. And I know that can sound so crazy to a lot of our listeners. But I just want to say that again. God wants to be in a symbiotic relationship with us. He wants us to ask. He wants us to plead. He wants us to know that he wants to have a conversation.
And it's interesting you said that, because there's a moment there where God wants to wipe out the Israelites. And Moses says no, and there's this dialogue. And it's really interesting that Moses sort of takes on an intercessory role here inadvertently. And that's where I think we need to say, okay, what are we looking to God for? Do we want all of our, rose bushes to have no thorns, and to always have the rain at night and sunny days, and, traffic lights always be green and no traffic? Is that the kind of God? I don't think that's really real life.
I had a second part of that question, but I think we answered it, which was, in moments of deep fear or uncertainty, how can we practically draw strength from our faith on a daily basis? I would just go back to what we had said in that first part. The daily basis idea is that before tragedy, start to work on a connection with God as your higher power, building that daily connection, building that daily acknowledgement that God is God, will start to walk you on a path that opens your heart up to a greater relationship with God.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll jump into question number 3. I don't think we have 10 questions. We're on question number 3, and
this isn't looking too promising.
We're nowhere near that, so we'll cut a bunch short here. But spiritual connections as a tool for facing tragedy. So I think we talked about that. I just want to jump ahead. Question number 4 is, and I think this is what a lot of people might be interested in, is helping your child through illness with spiritual guidance. When a child is facing a serious illness, parents often feel helpless. How can maintaining a strong spiritual connection with a higher power help parents guide their child through such difficult experiences? So the idea of asking this, Pastor Ram, is it's all well and dandy, everything that we have said up until this point, when it's just us as adults interacting with God, or interacting with faith, or interacting with religion. You bring children into the equation, and it's a whole different thing. I mean, we have a difficulty explaining normal things to each other. Now we're facing tragedy. How do we get to the point where our connections, our spirituality, our faith can now translate to helping our children through something?
That's a deep question. And I would say, when I look at the life of Jesus Christ, it may not help much, but the children were attracted to him. And he said, let the little children come to me. And to the point, he said, unless you become like little child. So what is Jesus getting at here? And I would say it's a simple trust. Like a child trusts his or her parents, I am mandated by God to trust him as a child trust his parents. And I think, when we look at a suffering child, dare I say, the story, the narrative seems to be in life always the same. Why do things not work out the way I want them to work out? When you look at the story of Job, and not that long ago I read through Job, that's a heartbreaking book. And when he has his three friends show up, they're basically coming to him and says, why isn't God behaving the way we want him to behave? That's basically it. And I want to spend more time in the future here to analyze that. But that's where we are wondering today, why isn't God behaving the way we want him to be? The story begins, Job is prosperous, and then tragedy comes. And there's an invading party, then there's an earthquake or a strong wind, and his children pass. And we don't understand some of these things. And I would say, whether you're 100 years old or 10 years old, a simple trust in the God who created us and who's redeeming us and has redeemed us. That's of paramount importance. And, we're so often looking at our lives like a lot's going to happen between this and that moment. And we kind of gauge our expectations of that. I know I have my own expectations about how life should progress, but I'm finding even at 58, things are changing and they don't work out the way I had expected them to work out. And, regarding my wife's health and other things going on in life. And so how do we sometimes just I have to accept things or says, Lord, I wish this was different. But I'm not God. And I don't believe we are predestined in any way, shape, or form. Life does happen. And when we look at some of the things that have happened in history, we just have to say, okay, what's going on here? And there is definitely a battle between good and evil. And I would have to say, you, me, all of us, all listeners to this podcast, we're on the battlefield. And we're getting hit with shrapnel. We're getting hit with fallout from, explosions and it's really a battle between good and evil. And so this is where it's being played out right here. And it ain't pretty.
Yeah.
It ain't pretty.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Authentic spiritual connections are important because they will, your children will see that. Right.
Right.
And I would say that when we, so hopping back to that first idea of forming a relationship prior to tragedy happening, I would say the same idea needs to happen with your children. Your children need to know that they can trust you before things go pear-shaped in this life. And so I think people need to work a lot harder at developing a trusting relationship with their children. If you tell your children you're going to do something, do it. If you explain something to them appropriately, make sure that the outcome is what you explained to them would happen. The minute that we start to try to manipulate our children or use things, you're going to build a relationship of distrust with your child. The reason why I say that this is important, when tragedy strikes, when you're trying to teach your child faith, if your child then looks upon you as someone that they cannot trust, the faith that you're trying to teach them through that tragedy will not be authentic to them.
And I just want to interject one thing. One thing I learned from my parents, and particularly my mom, I think the most powerful theologian, some of them in our lives, are our moms.
Amen.
is when you have a tough day You get home, you tell your mom about it, and you know what else you should do? You should pray about it.
Amen.
And you say, Lord, today I got something not nice happen on the playground. I'm sort of making this up, but it's in a way real life experiences. And Lord, I really am angry at Billy or Tommy. And Lord, I know you love Billy. I know you love Tommy. Help me to love them and try to understand them, why they did what they did. And I think that's where, we're trying to process it rather than, to use that expression, cancel it.
Sure.
And to say, okay, what am I supposed to be learning here in this situation? What is God allowing me to experience right here, right now? And I think when you look at some of these stories, let's say Billy in the playground, it's about a grace. Can we have grace for this moment? And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. And it's hard too for in these moments when a child goes through a tough time. Parent needs the grace. God is with us.
Yep.
He's with us all the time, even during these not so good times.
Yep. I think that vein of authenticity is super important, because your child will believe what you're trying to tell them if you had developed a life of trust and a life of truth and authenticity to them. You're not going to show up in this moment of tragedy and all of a sudden find, if you haven't built that trust with your child, that it will be easy to do. You can do it by the grace of God. You can do it even if that has happened. But I just want to explain that it would be better if you have already built a life of trust and understanding with your child.
I heard a quote years ago, and I'm paraphrasing it. Children will often forget what we tell them, but they will never forget what they see. And so if they see a parent, a dad, mom, somehow navigating through the hard times, that will speak volumes. But if they see this, floating along and questioning, and that's where we kind of get into trouble.
I think the next part I really want to hop into is, how do you now, what advice do you have for parents who want to share their faith with their children to help them understand and cope with death or loss? So you're at the point now where you are admitting or understanding now that your child is not going to make it through this illness. How do you communicate that to your child with faith at your back, with your spirituality, with God at your sails? How do you tell that to your children?
I would say we serve a God who created this world perfectly. And then sin came into the picture. And sin isn't the problem, it's the consequences of sin. And Alfonso, it takes a lifetime to sometimes process these things and to separate those two. But, we find ourselves victims. I hate to use the word victim, but sort of the recipients of the outflow and the results of the sin. And that falls, and even Jesus dealt with, he says the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And, God doesn't necessarily put an umbrella above the just and let it downpour on the, flood the unjust. It does happen, but here's the point. It comes out a-okay. And we're not simply this. If we say this world is all there is, and we are fooling ourselves, we're shortchanging God. God didn't create us to just see us live X number of years. He created us for a relationship, for eternity. And sometimes we forget, why does God do all this? And I like to point out that God could have had a very predictable, safe existence. Even on, recently I shared this in a sermon, on day number 5, he could have said, let's stop. We've got a great aquarium. We've got all these beautiful birds. let's stop. And even halfway through day 6, he creates mammals. He's got a great zoo. Stop. But he creates mankind with freedom of choice. We're free moral agents. And so the first, we don't know what day it was, but it doesn't take long. Adam and Eve ruined the whole plan. And then I think the tragedy is, that's tragedy 1 I mentioned earlier. Tragedy 2, Cain and Abel. It's not a story of the good guy winning. The quote, the villain, it kills the person doing the right thing. And, I think that's part of our lives, Alfonso, is just, we that's the narrative sometimes, but not the end. Not the end. And one day we will see Abel, and we will see, and all the others who have suffered. Think about John the Baptist. Jesus wasn't that far from John the Baptist on the earth. Mm-hmm. Yet he is at showdown, and he ends up being beheaded. Why is some of these happening? I don't know. It seems to me that, Jesus could have done something. And he allowed, I believe it was Herod and the daughter, and this whole saga going on there, for this thing to just spin out of control. And, he says, I'll give you up to everything, half of my kingdom. And what does she want? Instead of half the kingdom, she wants the head of John the Baptist on the platter.
Yep.
And, it's like, wow, so I don't have clean cut answers. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah.
But.
Well, I also don't have clear cut answers, but I can share the experience of what I told Inigo. And so that's
what I want to hear.
Yeah. So, but I just think it's always interesting to hear someone with pastoral experience, and to hear, because you do this for so many. And like I said in the introduction, is you have a difficult position because you are dealing with people's triumphs and you're dealing with people's tragedies, and you are supposed to, at the flip of a coin, be ready for either or. And so I would say it's one of the most difficult jobs to have, especially when people expect so much of you.
Well, I want to add, I'm glad you put it like that, Alfonso, because I want to be honest. I'm not God's PR man. Yep. I'm not his defense, his attorney.
Yeah, I think so many times as a general populace, we do put that onto pastors, priests, right. Clergy of any sort. We expect that of you, and you have to be ready. And if you're not, we're going to hold you to it. Yeah.
And I would like to say this, okay, so. And now we're going down a rabbit hole mm-hmm. here, Alfonso. Mm-hmm. But, okay, so let's say we want some things to never happen. Mm-hmm. So what is a criteria we would give to God where we suspend human freedom and the laws of physics? There's a great story that probably predates your time. That's still playing itself out. So there's a story. Her name was Joni or Johnny, and she was a young teenager. Maybe she was younger than being a teenager, and very athletic, super healthy. I think it was down in Maryland. She dives into a lake. Sadly to say, she didn't know there was a rock there. And she becomes a
paraplegic. Good. Close enough.
Maybe it was quadriplegic. I don't know. But
I think it was actually.
Was it? Okay.
I think so, yeah.
And so here's the amazing thing is, I read her book years and years ago, and they were hoping she'd be able to walk again. She never did. Mm-hmm. And I heard an interview with her about 20 years ago. And now she's an adult, this full-grown adult, literally has a ministry called Johnny and Friends, to minister to people with paralysis. And so she said something that I've always remembered. She said, considering how my life has turned out, if I could have undid that accident, I wouldn't undo it. That's stuck in my head. And I look at Job, how many millions of people have found comfort in that story. And maybe one day Job will be walking down, we'll run into him on the streets of gold and say, hey, are you Job? Yeah, my goodness, your story helped me through some incredibly hard times. And I'm bringing this back to the simple fact that, we, as much as we want to put guardrails up to say, God, you've got to prevent this one thing from happening. We can't. That's the thing is, we look at today, we look at the nuclear bombs. We've had experience now with it. But yet God still allowed the bomb to be created and to be used 2 times. And fortunately, mankind in its more rational moments have said, okay, we don't want to go down that path. And so we have learned to, by grace and wisdom, to sort of set our own boundaries on that. But there was a moment there where we didn't even use that as a boundary because things were so out of control. So at any rate, I don't know if that makes any sense, Alfonso, but that's maybe where I might change my thinking next week, but that's where I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, I know. And so I can say in practical terms, parents, and talking to you, the idea of how do you take, so say you have started to have a spiritual life either before this happens or you have come to it in the midst of your child's tragedy. As I've stated, what my experience was is we already have a vein of faith through our lives as Inigo is diagnosed. A continued theme here is that we never stopped our habits, our faith habits. Right. And so in one of our initial episodes, we spoke with Rabbi Susan, the chaplain at Children's Hospital, and or the head of spiritual care. And one of the things that we talked about was continuing your faith habits even in the hospital. The hospital throws your schedules completely off, and you really don't have a lot of say in your time of day. Your child at 2:00 in the morning, the MRI room is open and they need an MRI. Well, 2:00 in the morning, you guys are rushing off to MRI. So in all of that, one of the things that we spoke about with Rabbi Susan was continue your faith habits. And our faith habits was welcoming the Sabbath on Friday evenings with Rabbi Susan. And so we obviously we weren't doing that before the hospital. We would have been welcoming the Sabbath here at home, but we started to make sure that we took part in that in the hospital. And that was great. Rabbi Susan, she was fantastic in explaining whatever faith traditions and habits you have, don't allow this tragedy to stop them. Continue them. Show that those moments are still authentic, even when tragedy hits. And so for us, we did that. We made sure that we continued. So Inigo begins, we leave rehabilitation, we leave Children's Hospital, and Inigo is now outpatient. We're at home, and we're going in for we're going into the infusion clinic just about daily at the Jimmy Fund. And we come home every day, and as we go to bed every night, we continue to have our nightly worship. We're reading the books that we were actually reading a C.S. Lewis book at the time. It was about fear. It's one actually specifically put together for kids, which was great. Mrs. Malin actually from church gave it to us, and I said, "Perfect, let's do this one for worship." And so we we continued the habits that we had before. So we would still have our worships. We would still have our moments where we would talk to God. The difference being is that now Inigo was starting to ask the difficult questions that as a parent, you say, okay, this is something that I need to answer. And so those difficult questions were, as you've alluded to, why has this happened to me? Where do we go from here? And what's going to happen to me? And in all practical terms, I did what I did when I was trembling and shaking and couldn't stop. And I said,
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
I need your help. I need to be able to communicate this to Inigo without creating more
Yeah.
fear, without creating discouragement, and without creating a sense of loss, of forever loss, right? And it's not that I was going to sugarcoat this or circle it with flowers, but I needed to be truthful with him in a way that did not cause him to feel despair.
Mm-hmm.
And so wherever I know where I got the words, God gave me the words to say to him. And here we were on a nightly basis. We would talk about Job. And so if a family is listening to this and you don't know the book of Job, it's a tough story. It's an absolutely tough story. However, the great thing about the book of Job is I would take away two things from it. Job's faith in God never wavered, even through all the tragedies that he went through.
Yeah.
When he did reach a moment where he was questioning God, God pulled back and showed him he was God. He showed him his power. He showed him.
Where were you?
Yep.
Where were you when I? Yep.
Exactly. He showed him how he moves the world. That's a
Yep.
really important distinction. So Job never gave up his faith in God. When Job did waver in not his faith, but in his understanding, God made sure to show him his power. That's really, really important. And then 3, I think that we should, for a family that has never read Job, Job makes sure to praise God in all things, whether tragedy or whether things are going well. Yep. And we went through these things with Inigo. And I told Inigo, this is your Job story. This is your Job moment. And I think we should all, in this moment, decide to acknowledge God and his power, to honor and praise him, whatever his will is, and for whatever happens, to never lose faith in him. Now, a lot of you are going to listen to that and go, that's crazy. Like, that's not interesting to us. And I get it. Once again, this has to do with a vein of continued faith. And because we were in that vein, that's easy for us to have that conversation. The thing with Inigo is that because we already had a habit of him trusting us, spiritually trusting what we were teaching him to come true, he didn't doubt what we were talking to him about. And I would say that's where the real mercy of all of this shows its face, is that as we are telling him that through all of this, it will be okay. Because that's the idea of the Job story, is that through everything, it's going to be okay. What happens at the end, and not, once again, for families that have never read it, I'm going to just put some spoilers in here. In the end, Job is fully restored. His family is restored, and he is okay. He is okay. And so the idea when you're telling a child this story, that I would argue is not a story for children, because children don't have the life experiences to understand some things. But when a child has cancer, you fast forward them into a life of understanding. Trust me, I am going to tell you that your child is going to fast forward into understanding a lot of concepts that you wouldn't tell a child because you wouldn't feel it's age appropriate. And so here Inigo was understanding loss. He was understanding grief, but he was understanding that we weren't going to waver on what we believed. We were still going to believe that we had faith in God, that God's power was here long before we existed, and that in the end, we would be restored. And whatever that meant for Inigo, we knew that meant that whatever he thought he was going to lose and whatever we thought he was going to lose, God would restore him, and more than we could ever imagine. So we have that conversation, but that's when he's at home. Now we fast forward into the end is near, and this is about 8 months later. And so we have these conversations where, and if some of you have watched Inigo's Celebration of Life and have heard the slideshow about the the end or the after, I said to Inigo, we sat down, we had a conversation after his last MRI, and we said, Inigo, we have run out of options, which means that we've run out of time. And, but for whatever you feel like you have lost, you haven't lost it. You will live again. And so we go through the concepts of faith that we had always taught him, which is this world will end. And if we don't live and to see Jesus come back, we will die in Jesus, but we will go to sleep in peace. And that when we wake up, when Jesus comes back, everything will be restored. That same Job concept. And so here we are talking to him about that at the very end. And so he says, yeah, I get it. Like, I know we've been talking about this all along. So this is it. And we said, yeah, this is it. And he says, I don't have to be sick anymore. And we said, nope, you don't have to be sick anymore. And so it's an important distinction for us to make, that your children have wisdom. Mm-hmm. And your children will understand certain things, but you need to walk them there. Okay. And so he said to us, he said, so I get to go to sleep now, and I get to wake up tomorrow morning, and this will all be over. And we said, yes, that's exactly how this works. And a lot of you parents will listen to this and say, what do you mean tomorrow morning? Well, in our beliefs, when we die, we go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And when Jesus comes back to rescue this world from the sin that we are enveloped in, we will wake up on a new morning. And that's what we had taught him all along. And here he is conceptualizing that and saying, wait, I don't have to be sick anymore. And it was just this revelation to him of, okay, I'm good with this. This makes a lot of sense to me. If that's what's going to happen, Dad, I don't need you to be sad anymore, because, I'm a crier. I can admit to that. I'm a very emotional person. And this was hitting me hard. This kid, and he was my best friend, And so for me, I had to tell him, because he said, Dad, if you believe what you have taught me to believe, why are you so sad all the time? And just to hear him calling out my faith, but I explained to him, I said, no, it's not that I don't have faith in what's coming next. It's that I'm going to miss you, because I have to live out whatever time that I have to live out on this earth. And I said, but it's not because I doubt that I won't see you again. I will see you again. And so that would be my answer to this question is, how do you talk to your children about it? You're honest with them. You tell them the truth. We can't sugarcoat it, guys. If your child is going to die, you need to be the one to tell them. Now, I want to make a disclaimer here that Lindy and I talked about. We are, as Pastor Ram is, we are specially equipped. And we were specially equipped to talk to Inigo about this stuff. I have taught Bible classes. I'm well versed in this stuff. Lindy's a nurse. She's well versed on the medical side. We can talk to him about these things. And then Pastor Ram obviously is well versed in pastoral care. So if called into action, he will do his best, even though he's not been through it. And so what my suggestion would be to parents, if you are not equipped, if you can't find the words in your grief to have these conversations with your children, reach out to someone in pastoral care that is equipped. Reach out to a Pastor Ram, reach out to your chaplain services or your spiritual care services at the hospital. Allow them, enable them to tell your children the truth about what's coming. We should not hide to our kids that they are going to die from this illness. And I think it's important. Yeah, go ahead, Pastor Ram.
So it's interesting. Paul started the church at Thessalonica, another tongue twister there. But and the believers were starting to die. The church had been around long enough that there were people starting to die. And in First Thessalonians chapter 4, he writes these very important words: "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be misinformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope." That's a powerful sentence right there. Mm-hmm. And we understand about death, but more importantly, it's about hope. "For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. Those, according to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds and meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever." And then Paul says, "Therefore, encourage one another with these words." And so again, we have to realize that the end isn't the end. It's a comma. And it's a comma, it's just a pause. And the good book tells us that there will be people resurrected there in which now I believe is Greece. And who believed in the first century. And that's our hope. And it's the devil has been defeated, Alfonso.
Yep. So I want to close it here because we've gone on. We could probably do 2 more episodes on this.
Oh my!
And especially since I love these conversations. I probably do much better in these podcasts than the others. But I love philosophy. I love the study of God. I just love it, and I think there's so much to glean here. I want to put something out here to parents. I know that for a lot of you, if you're not if you do not have a faith in God or a faith tradition, it's okay, and this conversation may not be of value to you, but I just think it's important to tell our stories, and I think it's important for us to share what we have gained from the faith that we do have. I am not telling you what you should believe. What I am telling you is what I believe, and what Pastor Ram and I are sharing with you here is a shared faith tradition that leads us to acknowledge the power of God and of Jesus's resurrection and overcoming of death. That for us is good news. And because it's good news, we can't help but share it. But once again, I do want to give pause and make sure that we are telling you we're not trying to turn you off. Mm-hmm. If you're a family that is going through this with your child, if you're a family that is dealing with the loss of your child, there's no way around it. The pain that you are going through is unimaginable. And the tragedy of a diagnosis like this, like a medulloblastoma, like Inigo got, is unimaginable. But what I can tell you, at least in the experiences that Lindy and I have, we are so thankful for the faith that we did have in going through this, because we don't think we could have made it out of the other side the way that we have. And what I mean by that is, from day one of Inigo being diagnosed, we held our heads high, knowing that whatever happened, it was going to be okay. When Inigo passed away, we left that hospital and we were driving down Sturrow Drive on the way back. And we just looked at each other and I said to Lindy, I said, have you ever wanted Jesus to come back more than you do right now in this moment? And of course, no. When you lose a child, you want Jesus to come back that second. You can feel it. It is visceral. Mm-hmm. It is pulling at your chest. And so I would argue that for Christians going through this, that's how we should feel every second of every day. We should want that to happen every single day. And what that means, the truth of what that means, is that we love each other through all of this. It means that we don't keep people. Hold on, let me say that again. It means that we do not gatekeep people out of God's love for them.
Okay.
It means that we show people that the love of God is so merciful, so accepting, so generous that you can't be kept from it if you're willing to accept it. And so, two things for us that are important: we acknowledge God and his power. We also acknowledge that he loves us. And in loving us, we should love others more than we could ever love ourselves. And in doing that, we can help our children through this. So once again, if you are a family of faith and you're going through this, continue with your faith traditions, continue loving your child through this, because love truly is the cure. Love, Jesus is love, and he did come back to cure this world. And one day we're going to get the payoff to that. And if you're not a family of faith, we know that a lot of this conversation is going to turn you off. But what I would implore you to understand is that there can be a way for you to also garner some sort of reprieve from the pain that you feel. Yep. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just telling you what helped us through this moment. And it might be something that you want to look into. So Pastor Ram, thank you so much for joining us. Is there something that you want to share in closing?
Just, I'm being blessed by talking with you, Alfonso, about this. And, you know, the one thing I will mention is 11 years ago, my dad passed away at the young age of 70. Today, 70 is. But a lot of it was lifestyle choices. And he's buried in Norway, the very southern tip of Norway. I can tell you exactly where his plot is. But he died believing in Jesus Christ. And I know that we will see him. We will see him resurrection morning. We will see him. And so that gives me a whole lot of hope, gives my mom a lot of hope, my wife, our son. And it just changes our perspective. And, you know, it comes back to, you know, the fact that we all need to say, where do we come from? Where are we now? Where are we going? And God is saying, I want you guys. I want a relationship with you. And that's what it comes down to. And you know, whether it be young Inigo or my dad at 70, or had a church member, she passed at 105, you know, and it's just, he's looking for the same thing. He's sort of hungry for what we're hungry for, is meaningful relationships. So that's what I would close with. And I think if we couldn't comprehend the pain that is in the world today, but God can. You know, over the ages, the pain, the tears that have been shed, God knows all the pain. Every single tear he is aware of. So, and Revelation does say he will wipe away all of our tears. Very clear. Wipe them all away. Death will be defeated. And imagine God wiping away our tears. Just amazing. So
love that.
Yeah.
Pastor Ron, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is a very, it's an important conversation to have. I would just implore parents out there, as you walk your children through the last days of their life or through their illness, believe in something. It is important. Love your children. Show them that love is authentic. Build a relationship, and it's you know, it's never too late if you want to. Like I said, like, our numbers might be dwindling, but our belief in a higher power is growing. And so if today is a day that you want to start figuring out what it means to pray to a higher power, give it a whirl. It might just be something that is beneficial for you. So Pastor Ron, thank you so much for the conversation. I absolutely appreciate you, and we will talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you for the honor.
As we wrap up, I hope this conversation has offered some insights or encouragement for those of you who are facing the unthinkable. Faith can be a powerful tool, whether it helps you gain strength, find peace, or feel connected to something greater during moments of deep pain. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, you are not alone in this journey, and there are resources, both spiritual and practical, that can support you along the way. Until next time, this has been the Love is the Cure Foundation Conversations. Go love on someone, ask for help when you need it, and remember, you are not alone in this journey.